Hey, everybody, Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, here for episode 6 in our 8-part series, 8 Steps to Scale Your Syndication Business. And here to help us figure out how to do that is Staci Gray from Organized to Scale. Hey, Stace.
Hey there. Good to
Happy
be
to
here.
have you here. Yeah, it's good to have you here. And we've been grinding these things out. We're excited about it. And today we're going to be talking about 10 core processes to scale your syndication business. You know, people that are familiar with computers know that the CPU, the central processing unit, does all the work. And it's interesting that there's the word core because it has a number of cores. Now, that doesn't completely correlate, if you will, to what we're talking about. But the thing is that you have to understand a business like a human body or like an automobile is a collection of related systems. You know, in an automobile, of course, you have your chassis and your drivetrain, and you have your engine, you have your air conditioning, you have your electrical, all that. In human body, you know, you've got your spine and your skeleton and all that. You've got your nervous system, you've got your organs, you've got your circulatory system, your respiratory system. So these are all systems that kind of work together, but are dealt with independently. And so in your business, which is really an organism, I know people like to use the word organization, but that makes it sound static. And I like to use the metaphor of an organism because it's literally living and dynamic, and there's a lot of things going on, and you get turnover of cells, if you will, individuals, and you have collections of people that form organizations within your organization. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And so it's really important to kind of understand what those processes are. So Staci, you put together a list of these 10 core processes and you gave them to me. So I'm just going to kind of go through them one at a time. And we're just going to hit the high notes because, you know, you could do a whole book or a whole 2-day clinic on this stuff, but we want you to be aware, if you're in the business of syndication or considering getting into the business of syndication, these are some things that you want to kind of look at on an individual basis, but then also think about how they integrate into each other. So the first one is one of my personal favorites. How do you build your brand and build your network? Stace, why do you consider this to be a core process? What is it and why is it a core process?
So it's essentially marketing. So how are you going to build your reputation and get in a position to raise capital? So these 10 core processes are actually the 10 core processes we process map during a 3-day strategic planning session with our clients. And they came out of many conversations and years of research within your Inner Circle and Syndication Mentoring Club program. So these have been in use, in practice, in the real world, and being executed on, which is important because these aren't things that we've just thrown up because they sound good or we want to make sure to cover all of our bases. These are actually the ones where people start processes, end processes, move their investors through, move their deals through, move their businesses through. So building your brand and building your network is probably the most important one, because without investors and without relationships, you won't have deals and you won't raise capital. So making sure that that process is down and building your funnel. So from first contact to nurturing to one-on-one consultation to investor questionnaire to NDA to executive summary to PPM to operating agreement to investor communication to requesting referrals, the whole process is mapped out so that you can execute with confidence. And also, when you have all your processes mapped out, you're not stressing about, oh, did I think of everything? We've mapped it all out, so we've thought of everything. So that's the first one, and really where it all begins, because without relationships, there's no way you're going to raise capital or do deals.
Right. I mean, I love it. Brand is how people feel about you. It's the reason people choose to do business with you. They know you, like you, trust you in terms of your ethics and your competency. And in this case, they trust your team. They trust your organization. It's not just you, but it's everybody that represents you. And of course, the network is just how many people on the list that feel that way. And the bigger that list is, then when you put a deal in front of them that makes sense, they're probably going to buy. And when they find a deal that they need help with, they're probably going to bring it to you. And so when you build a strong brand and you build a strong network, you end up getting the best of both worlds. It's nice to say, hey, you need to do this, but it really begs the question, how? And so because we're talking about processes, just understand that these aren't things that happen haphazardly, but there is actually processes and systems and procedures and things you can train people
Mhm.
to create these outcomes. And so you want to have on your list of things to define, how am I going to build my brand and build my network, and then work on putting those processes in place. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, how do you acquire investors? And that
Mhm.
maybe is a little bit different. Of course, it starts with building your brand and building your network, but now it's kind of next in line. So how does that work, and why is that on the list?
Yeah, and I just want to say a caveat. All of these have legality to it, because depending on the type of syndication that you're doing, there's ways which you are allowed to be go out on social media marketing, making calls, presenting your deal, and there's ways that you cannot. So make sure that as you are building out these processes, that you are involving your legal counsel to make sure that it's compliant with the type of syndication that you're doing. So I just want to say that
Which is
first
part of the
before we get,
process, right? Part
which
of the
is part
if you're
of the process.
before
Yes.
you post something, or before you create a brochure or a flyer, or even an email or a website or a web page, you have to work with your compliance counsel to make sure. And over time, you learn the principles. Once you understand the principles of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, most of the time you're going to get it right. In the beginning, you're probably going to be spending a little more time with your attorneys making sure, and then over time, you're going to get more comfortable. But you also end up, part of your processes will be getting a lot of things templated. And
Mhm.
once you understand those templates, then you just insert the variables, but the basic compliant principles or concepts are still in place.
Correct.
Okay, that was a great point. Okay, so number two, how do you acquire investors?
So when you think of processes, think of an entrance and an exit. So it comes in at a certain point, and then you go through all these steps, and it goes out at a certain point. So there's a handoff between processes, so that you don't lose a contact, or you lose a relationship, or you don't have a successful assembly line. So there's always an entrance point and an exit point. So building your brand is all about building awareness, getting yourself out there, and then at the point that somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I'm interested. Okay, well then at what point, what does that process look like? Do you have them sign an NDA? Do you do a one-on-one phone call with them? Do you have a sales rep? Is it you yourself? What does that, do you have an investor questionnaire? What does that all look like, until you get to the place where they want to move forward with you? And then when they want to move forward with you, who do they make the check payable to? Where do you send the funds? Where do you deposit the money? What is the expectation going to be? How much are you going to communicate with them, so they're not blowing up your cell phone on the weekend because they haven't heard from you in 2 weeks? So what does all of that look like in terms of, from the time they raise their hand until you have funds in hand, and they're invested in the deal?
Yeah, and the key is documentation, because you may think, well, I mean, once I know how to do it, I know how to do it. But as you're going to find out as we move through these processes, you're going to end up, it's not you, like, not how are you as an individual going to do it. It's how you as an organization are going to do it. That means defining roles and responsibilities. And I'm sure that that's on the list. In fact, I see that it is. So we're definitely going to be covering that. But the point is that you're doing the R&D in the beginning while you're figuring things out, even if you're a one man or one woman band in the beginning. So, but the difference between marketing is things that you're putting out there, hoping to attract somebody to talk to. Acquiring an investor is, now I've got somebody to talk to. How do I develop that personal, individual, one-on-one relationship into an investor? So good one. Okay, so number
Right.
three, how do you communicate with your investors? Now you've got a bunch of investors. You've done the first two. You got a bunch of people in deals. You've got them on your list. They're no longer prospects, they're actually clients. And now you've got to communicate with them. And they expect communication. You've made perhaps commitments of communication to a degree. You may have some legal obligations to communication. And so you have to make sure that you're actually going to do these things. And so you have to know how you're going to do that. So talk a little bit about that one, Stace, communicating with your investors.
Yeah, so this can depend also at the timing of when an investor is added to your deal. So if you're actively in the fundraising phase and someone gets in early, and you're not going to close that fund for another 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or depending on how long it takes you to raise the capital, investor one is communication may look a little bit different than investor 14 or 20, depending on when they get in. But usually it looks like a welcome email, or a welcome phone call, or a welcome packet that you mail out to them saying, welcome, congratulations, you're a part of this deal. We're so excited. Here's the expectation. This is what communication will look like. We will communicate with you once a week until we're fully funded. Once we're fully funded, we'll send you pictures of the project or updates every month, and distributions will happen quarterly. If you have any questions, this is our investor relations contact. You can communicate with them. And you make all of those introductions so they feel very safe and secure with their money in your hand, knowing that they have this expectation of when they're going to be communicated with, when their money is going to be distributed to them, and what that is all going to look like. So sometimes I have people say, well, I'll just let the investor decide. I'll let them decide how often they want to be communicated with, or if they want a check or direct deposit, or however they want to do it. That's not very scalable, because if you let each individual investor decide how they want it to be done, they're basically dictating how you're going to run your business versus the other way around. And it instills a lot of confidence when you say, this is our process, this is how we do it. We will communicate with you here, here, and here. You'll get your distributions on this date. It will come in this fashion. It will come with a financial report. And they're like, okay, these people know what they're doing. I feel really secure. So having that all built into your process is actually a tool to build your brand as well, not just build happy current investors.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, because I was sitting and thinking, oh, that'd be a great point to make, right? That having great operations is actually a marketing tool. So, but you covered that, so good job. I have something else, though, that for those of you that are old enough to remember MySpace. Remember MySpace? So MySpace was, I think the technical term was a cluster. It was just a giant mess, right? When you put together your MySpace space, I mean, it was literally your space. You could do anything you wanted. You could organize it any way, any color scheme. It was a free for all. And it sounded like a good idea because it was all about individuality, which was fantastic. But when you actually went to go use it, you'd go from profile to profile, profile to profile. It was like getting lost in the jungle. I mean, you couldn't figure out who this person was, what they were doing. And so Facebook came along with a very similar model, but very structured, very organized. This is how we do it. And, say what you want about Facebook, but they definitely had a cultural impact and took widespread adoption and destroyed MySpace, even though MySpace had the lead. And I've always felt that one of the things that they did was they created conformity in terms of ease of use. So people would go in and they would know what to expect. We travel a lot, and my partner, Robert, the host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, would often say, the reason people, when they travel, go into places like Denny's and McDonald's isn't because the food is the best food. It's because they know exactly what to expect. Now, imagine that you have a chain of high end where you go into, like a Morton Steakhouse or something like that, and you're going to go in and you know exactly what to expect, and it's going to be a great experience. I think when we talk about syndication business, we're saying there can be a degree of conformity, there can be a degree of uniformity, there can be a degree of structure that doesn't make it impersonal. It makes it safe and predictable, and people know how to find their way around. There's a reason we have stoplights and lines on the road, right? In Europe, I remember we went to France one time, and there was no lines in the road. There was only lines when you came to the intersection. Everybody get in order, and then once you got out of the intersection, it was just a free for all again. Mexico was like that too, whereas in the United States, we're used to lane lines the whole time. And I think that there's something to be said for having that kind of structure, even in your communication, especially in your communication, because I learned a long time ago that if you're constantly communicating to people, even if you're going through a problem, it continues to build their trust, and they tend to, you can shepherd people through those issues a little bit better if the communication is there. Okay, so number 4, how do you prepare and present your offerings?
So this is the process of when you've identified a deal and you want to structure it, so legal usually is involved in this process, financing is involved in this process. If you have partners are involved in this process. You create your deal timeline, you create your NDA, your executive summary. Usually people already have an NDA, but if you haven't, your first time around, you'll create one. And your one pager, your executive summary, your PPM, your operating agreement, and getting all of it ready for how you're going to present it. So presenting it, whether you're doing it a one-on-one on a sales call, in a webinar fashion, in an in-person event fashion, however you're presenting it, and then walking through that process for them to actually acquire it. So there's overlap between the how to prepare and present your offering, and then also how to acquire investors, because there's two sides of it. There's the prepare and present, which is your side of it, And then there's the investor side of it where they have to participate as well. So there's overlap between those two processes, or a handoff, I guess, between the two until they sign their documents and then they're in your deal.
Yeah, when we teach, we talk about how to organize an offering, and we always start with the context, which is, what is the investment thesis? In other words, what is the financial result you're trying to achieve? Is it income, preservation of capital, tax benefits, privacy, capital gain? What is it? And so there's that. Then there could also be some mission attached to it. We want the money to do something for us, but we also want the money to do something for the world. And there's people that are interested in social capitalism, green capitalism, doing something for the world, and that can be part of it as well. And so then you put your investment thesis out there, and then you present your market, whatever your market could be, your demographic, your geographic, or your product niche. And then underneath that, you are going to explain your deal, which is the story of the deal, but then the numbers of the deal. And so you kind of left brain, right brain, or right brain, left brain to get it correct. And then you present your team who's actually going to execute this. So that is a process on how you organize a basic offering. And then you have the one sheet, you have your executive summary, you have your formal offering documents. And of course, you also have whatever the presentation is, as Staci alluded to. So again, there are processes for creating this. And when you figure that out, then it kind of goes through this assembly line when a deal comes in the door, and there's the due diligence, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, but you have it come through. And once you've decided to do a deal, it's like, okay, how are we going to offer this deal? How are we going to organize the offering? And just understanding what that process is. And again, you can't assign roles and responsibilities and get help and get everything off your plate until you begin to define these processes and then organize these processes and then refine these processes to the point where, like McDonald's, they produce a very predictable result with relatively inexpensive labor, people that have good morals, decent skills, and are diligent and held accountable to come in and perform their function in your team, should be able to have good success for themselves, so they feel good about themselves and they feel good about the results they're producing, but also they are producing great results that you feel good about, that are producing bottom line for both you and your investors.
I just want to address one thing that I don't know if anyone watching this is thinking, well, I don't want to build that big of a business. I just want to build a small business. I want it to just be me. I don't really know if I need all of these processes. And I want to address that. So that's okay if you just want it to be you. And having processes creates predictability for yourself. It creates predictability for your clients, your investors, your partners, all of the relationships involved. And it allows you to have more stability. Now, the flip side of this, which is your story, is life can throw you curveballs. So you may right now in this moment be thinking that you want to just do this small scale business, that it will be sustainable. It's fine. I have the time. I have the energy. I want to do it. But then your spouse could get cancer and you realize now you have a short time left with that person and you want to spend your time with that person, but you don't have the processes in place. So now you have the burden of being there for your spouse and then also feeling like this business, your investors, is also a huge priority, and you have two conflicting priorities. Obviously, one of them probably is going to win over the other, but this is all about laying the foundation so that no matter what happens, even if you decide to run your own processes yourself for the rest of time, or you choose to build it through a team, or life forces you to build it through a team, you're prepared. So I just wanted to set that there, because sometimes it can feel overwhelming with processes, or people are saying, I don't have time. I have all this opportunity. I'm just going to do it myself. I can tell you from having done this with a lot of people and seeing a lot of life happen. I know I look young, but seeing a lot of life happen, that you don't know what's going to happen. We don't live in a bubble, even if the pandemic hopefully has exposed that for many of us, but social capital, community, relationships, those matter. And having these processes in place allows you to serve whatever human being you want to serve at a moment's notice, because you have the infrastructure.
And it also creates a lot of security and trust for your investors.
Mhm.
So just be aware that that it's an insurance policy, and
Yeah,
your investors deserve it, and so do you and your family if you have a family, right? Because if you get sick, or if somebody needs your help and they're the priority of your life, then your investors have to be dealt with by the team. There's certain things in life you can delegate most of your work. There's certain things, I know it doesn't feel like you can't, but believe me, you can. When push comes to shove, you can delegate most of your work. But it's really hard to delegate your health. It's really hard to delegate your relationships, your most vital relationships. You can't delegate those things. And when they call upon you and you've got to pay attention to them, you have to have an insurance policy, not just to pay the medical bills, not just to pay for whatever the catastrophe is, but also you have to have an insurance policy to know that you have
Mhm.
time to be able to focus on what your true, to live out your true priorities,
Mhm.
and not renege or fail on some of your most important responsibilities and obligations. So
Mhm.
that's a really, really good point. And
And
obviously I know that
and
firsthand.
yeah, and if you're attracting sophisticated investors, they're going to ask you. That is a question they're going to ask. So what happens if your plane goes down? What are you going to say? That's part of your offering story, is this is the team I have behind me. These are the safeguards I put in place. This is how you know that your money is going to be preserved. This just happened for one of our clients, and he said, this is how I answered it. And I got it all on a recording because we were in a 90-day review. And I said, great, we're going to turn this into an FAQs, because this is amazing for brand building that you have it solved. And not only that, the investor is like, I'm going to give you an extra 50,000 after, on top of what he already said, because he answered it so well. So it can also raise more capital for you too.
Wow, that's a great story. Love that. Can't wait
Yeah.
to can't wait to get the details on that one. Okay, so moving on. So we talked about how to prepare and present your offerings. Now, did we do acquire deals? Which one are we on now?
We're on how do you acquire deals?
How do we acquire deals? So we're number 5. So we're halfway through the list, folks. So thanks for sticking with us. We'll try to pick up the pace here a little bit. It's also interesting to us.
I know. So not the first time we've done it, but first time we've talked about it together. So the how to acquire deals. So this is where you have your personal syndication philosophy, you have your due diligence checklist, you know the types of deals you're looking for. You can have phase 1 due diligence, where you can quickly identify if this is a deal that fits your personal syndication philosophy. If it does, then you get more of your advisor and counsel involved, and then you go through phase 2 of due diligence. Then you go into your letter of intent or your initial offer, and then you go into your fundraising phase. Then you go, depending on the type of your deal you're doing, if it's all capital or you're gonna use any type of financing or anything, that's where you structure it all. And then if it's a phase 1 type of deal or a single phase deal, you figure it all out then, so you have a deal timeline and a path for acquiring that deal.
And I think the other thing too is having a process for what are you going to do with the deals that you don't take, right? If you're just saying no to everything, then that creates a problem. People will discontinue feeding you deals, and that's a problem. Number 2 is, just because it's not a deal for you, it could be a deal for somebody else. And when you pass it along to someone in your network, you've done something good for both the person bringing you the deal, which encourages them to do that again, but you've done something good for the person you pass the deal to.
Mhm.
Now, you can work out the legalities about whether or not there could potentially be something in it for you, but the goodwill alone is worth doing it, because especially if you're in something fairly esoteric, right? People get the word out, hey, this guy knows how to raise money, or these people are creating a lot of opportunity. We're going to bring them our deals, and you're no, 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 no. Well, you may kill a deal pipeline just because you're not interested at the moment, or not in a position at the moment that you would like to keep alive for a future opportunity. And the only way to do that is to get those deals placed. So
So
that's also part of the
inside,
process.
yeah, it is part of the process. And there's a kind of a, hey, thank you so much for thinking of me. This is a great deal. It's not a fit for us for X, Y, and Z. If you find something that has X, Y, and Z, please bring it to us. And that's a deal that would be a fit. So we have all of those inside of this process, so that you can continue to build your pipeline of people who are bringing you deals and build those relationships as well.
Yeah, and the
So
thing
that's
is, if
fine.
you've identified when in your underwriting the things that fit in certain boxes, and you've identified a network of people that do deals in boxes that you don't, you literally are performing an underwriting or a screening service for them, and you're adding a ton of value.
Mhm.
And you're going to have to do it anyway. So when you just say no, you've thrown all that work away. At least get some value out of it by passing it on to somebody else. And again, this just goes on to this idea of building your brand, building your network, which is the number one on the list. And I think something you do through everything that you do. It should be built into every single process, because you're always going to be dealing with people or have the potential to
Mhm.
uncover opportunities that for other people in your network that you can pass along. So don't just think about what's in it for me, but think about the bigger picture.
Mhm.
Okay, so now let's talk about we're on what, number six, managing deals, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so that's a little bit different. Now you've got the deal, and in some cases, in fact, all cases, you have to manage it through this, entry point to the exit point, whether that is 6 months or 6 years or 10 years or whatever the number is. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, so having the deal timeline is a start. So it's the deal timeline is within both of those two processes. So you know what your exit strategy is going to be, but your exit strategy could not happen for, like you said, 5 years, 10 years, who knows how long, depending on what the deal is. And so what is there going to be a point at which you refinance? Is there going to be a point at which you buy out investors, or you have a different phase of it where you're going to raise additional capital for another phase of the deal? So having that all mapped out, and you map it out as well as you can, but then, like you always say, try to keep the deal structures similar, so your processes can be closer in line. So there's going to be variables between deals, but it's, from a process perspective, it's really helpful to have deals that are structured kind of the same way, so your processes, you don't end up with 100 different processes, you
Well,
have one main one.
yeah, I think on that, there's two things. One is you don't want to let the operational tail wag the deal making dog, right? That's important. With that said, trying to get everything to fit into existing processes forces you to be disciplined in that. Am I being creative because I need to be creative, or am I being creative because I want to be creative? Am I making it more complicated than it needs to be? In other words, is it worth the extra effort it's going to take? And if I'm going to do it once for this particular deal, is there going to be enough deals behind it that this becomes a new process, a new way of doing a new type of deal? And that's kind of the scaling mentality, is not just looking at everything as a one-off. It's not a transactional, it's a systemic. Your you look at your the market as a bunch of relationships, and then you look at your business as a series of processes, which is kind of the whole theme here, as opposed to just a bunch of random relationships and a bunch of random transactions, and you're just running around looking for the next transaction in the marketplace. There's a lot of people that conduct business that way, and if you go to the next level, then you really set yourself apart on a lot of levels, and we don't have time to go into it, but financial, personal, building your network, building goodwill. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Uh,
Mhm.
but managing a deal is not just managing the project, the property, if you will, but it's also, I'm a big fan of managing the balance sheet, managing the financials. That's part of managing the deal, managing the tax, managing the record keeping. That's all part of the deal. So there's a lot of things that go on just in the category of managing the deal in the life cycle, from the time you get it until the time you dispose of it.
Hmm. And managing the deal may look different if you're a syndicator that raises capital and you partner with operators. So your capacity in terms of managing the deal is going to look very different than a syndicator who raises the capital and is the operator.
Yeah, it's the same thing as an investor, right? Your life looks very different if you hire a property manager versus if you are the property manager.
Mhm.
Robert Offutt says life is too short to manage property. But
Mhm.
if you love it, that's great. Then turn it into a business and do it for other people, and you can scale that too. In fact, that's how Kenny McElroy started in the syndication business. He was a property manager, and he realized the best way to keep his property management company busy was to syndicate the deals and let them provide the management. So his syndication was about building his property management business. And almost by default, he ended up growing this amazing balance sheet and this huge reputation. And, we could talk for hours about Kenny and all the processes. I remember going in and taking a tour of MC companies and watching him explain their process for deal acquisition. And that once a week he would go in and they would review all of the deals that the team had vetted that had made the first cut. And then Kenny got a chance to go over the second cut. So he didn't even bother to look at anything that hadn't made it past the first cut. And so there was a lot of stuff that got left on the cutting room floor, if you will, to mix metaphors. But then it was a very efficient process for him. So he could come in and he knew what to expect. They knew exactly what he was going to be looking for. They presented it to him exactly in the way he wanted it, kind of like that Facebook thing I mentioned earlier. So he knew exactly where to find the data, exactly what to look like. And the same thing is true for their investors. When they would present the deal, the investors knew exactly where the financials were going to be, how they were going to be formatted, what to expect in the business plan, using a very consistent template. So, if you ever get a chance to take a look at one of Kenny's deals, you can see the output of some of the systems he has in place. But he's built a very big, successful company, largely on the back of sound scaling principles that we're talking about right here. Okay, so from managing deals, now it's how do we manage money? Number 7, how do you manage money and produce financial reports? That's another key process. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, Stace, but put a little color on that for us.
Yeah, it's self-explanatory. However, this is where a lot of syndicators
sin.
Yeah.
For a lot of syndicators, sin. This
Yes.
is where good people become Ponzi operators because they lose control of the money and then they start doing bad things for good reasons, trying to fix a problem, trying to cover it up instead of just being honest about it. So having great processes from the get-go in this area in particular can prevent you from ever facing that temptation.
Yes. So making sure you have the proper bank account set up, that you're separating your reserve money from your operating money, making sure that your bookkeeper, accountant, CPA are all involved in knowing from the time money is in hand through the whole life cycle of a deal and distributions, that it's all being calculated correctly, that you're actually looking at real numbers and you're providing your investors with accurate K1s, and all in a timely fashion. So that process, it's a simple one, but it is a really, really valuable one for building your brand and building your reputation, for creating credibility, for having repeat investors, for building your individual confidence, knowing that you can go raise capital and return money. Most of the people that are in our group, in our audience, yours at the Real Estate Guys, mine within Organized to Scale, and of course in the Syndication Mentoring Club, are really good people. They're mission-minded people. They have strong values, strong integrity. Their probably biggest fear in starting a syndication business is losing somebody's money. And this one process can provide a lot of confidence to you as a syndicator that, okay, I've got this down solid and I know that I can go raise money and I'm going to give consistent distributions, and it's going to be something that's compliant, legal, and all in an ethical fashion. So
yeah, your numbers are your dashboard, and your numbers will start to tell you that there's a symptom maybe of something going wrong. And the people who are going to see it first are going to be the people who are in the weeds of the bookkeeping and the accounting, and they have to have permission to bring things to your awareness. That's number one. And then the other thing is that a good investor is going to be curious about the chain of custody of their money. In other words, I give you my money. Where's it going to go? How are you going to use it? What's the visibility? Who's in control of it? And when you can answer that question well and explain to people how the money is going to be handled, they have a lot greater confidence that there's no shenanigans going on, which is, sadly something that happens in this business far too often. So you can turn this actually into a huge competitive advantage, as Staci said, use it to build your brand and build your network. But you can also use it to create a high level of accountability. You have to understand that you're a human being just like anybody else. And when you're handling large amounts of money, there's large amounts of temptation. And if you can structure it in such a way so that you have a lot of accountability, you can't get in there and fool around with the money because other people have visibility into everything that you do, and you have visibility into everything that they do, and that there's multiple people who are all looking at what's going on. The odds of something going on that is inappropriate go down considerably. And that's a very, very important consideration in this business. So don't discount focusing on developing great processes in regard to managing money and producing financial reports. Number 8, how do you maintain legal compliance? This is another very, very important one.
Yeah, very important and very simple too. The next two, the one after this, is also very simple but important. Legal compliance, I have a saying, if it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist. But a lot of it is keeping your entities current, keeping your if you're going to do a 506B or 506C, that you're making sure that at the point of when you're acquiring your deal and when you're presenting your deal, that you have legal involved each step of the way, even within brand building. So making sure, depending on the type of deal you're doing, if you're taking accredited investors or not, what you're allowed to do on social media, if you're appearing on somebody else's podcast, that you know what you can and cannot say, if you need to have an investor questionnaire. So a lot of what maintaining legal compliance is making sure your structure is current, but also your external communication is compliant with whatever is legally acceptable. And that can change. So making sure that you have a strong advisor, somebody like Mauricio, who works with a lot of our syndicators, involved each step of the way, will help keep you compliant. And Absolutely. Then making sure it's calendared so you don't miss it, because it's one of those things that it can be out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about risk here in just a minute, which kind of fits into the same category. But, and there's more than just the securities compliance and the entity structure. There's business licenses. I mean, there could be other things that are involved depending on the nature of the project. So lots of moving parts. And so this is where checklists and calendar alarms and backups, so that if the alarm goes off on somebody's computer and not yours, and nobody knows it happened. So there's a lot of things tactically you do when you're setting up, organizing your business to run from a team. And of course, with today's cloud-based services and all kinds of stuff, there's so many tools available. It isn't so much like you've got to spend a lot of money in the infrastructure, but you do have to spend some time to understand what's available and then organize it. A lot of these services are actually free or very inexpensive. So it can all be done, but just because it can be done doesn't mean it will be done unless you identify it as part of the 10 things you need to focus on. And then you get into the weeds on each one, dealing with each one in depth, kind of as its own animal, and then considering how they all integrate, which is kind of the concept that we're explaining here. So moving on to number 9 here, how do you manage risk? And that's another important one, right? Because, when I played football, and I wasn't very good, this was just like high school and 1 year junior college football, but we always were told, if, on defense, if the offense doesn't score, if the opponent doesn't score, you can't lose. And so that's the basis of winning, right? The first rule of winning, according to Warren Buffett, is not losing. So rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, don't forget rule number 1, right? That's Warren Buffett's kind of investing concept. Well, the idea here is that, managing risk is a very important part of growing wealth, because if you make a bunch of money and you lose it all because you haven't managed risk well, then you might as well not even have made the money, and you've lost worse than losing the money. You've lost all the time and effort and goodwill it took to earn the money to start with. So risk management is a very important process. Most optimistic entrepreneurial syndicators tend to do a poor job on. And so hopefully by drawing it to your attention, you'll not be on that list. You'll take it seriously and do a good job. So Stace?
Yeah. So part of managing risk is actually building that into all the other processes. So you have legal involved in the other processes, you have insurance, you have redundancies, you have probably one of the bigger one is just alignment, culture, values, all of that. So you building that into all of the other processes, and then down to managing risks like document privacy. So you're dealing with a lot of people's personal financial information. So how are you protecting that? If it's compromised, what's your plan to deal with it? How are you protected if something were to happen to you? How's your investors' money protected if something happens to you? So all of those things are the things to consider when you're mapping out your process map for managing risks and making sure that it's all set up. So if something like that happens, you have a plan of action.
And, as you're sitting here listening to all this, again, to Stacy's point earlier, it can seem completely overwhelming, but remember that syndication is the art of being able to scale, go big, and everything is harder when you're small.
Mhm.
So if you raise $1 million, this is a lot of hassle. If you raise $100 million, then it isn't 100 times harder. It's just only a little bit harder, and it's actually a lot easier because you have the budget to be able to hire great advisors, put in great infrastructure. And the way I approach these things is I have a 3-step process, just like building a property. You have your architectural team, the people who kind of design what it needs to look like, and you're going to be a part of that because it needs to conform to your vision. Then you're going to have your implementation team, the people who actually build it and put all the systems in place and all of that. And then you're going to have your operational team, your maintenance team, that are actually going to run the machinery that you put in place. And then you'll revisit from time to time with the other folks, what through a process we got, I think from Brian Tracy, plan, do, review. But when you do your reviews, you're going to say, okay, where's the machinery need to be fine tuned? So the heavy lift is getting it all in place. But if you're doing it with the idea in mind, I'm not going to raise $1 million or $10 million. I'm going to go raise 50, 100, 200. We have guys in our program that 250, $300 million in 5 years. And these things are easy for them to deal with because they have plenty of scale. Well, the Fed is printing trillions and trillions of dollars right now. There's no lack of money out there. There's no lack of deals out there. What really is how well you step into the marketplace and organize yourself to get a big bite. And it's not going to be by working harder. It isn't even going to be by working smarter as an individual. It's going to be by designing and building a team and an organization, which we're going to talk about next. So, Stace, how do you build and lead a team?
Hmm. This is probably my favorite thing. It's a lot of what Organized to Scale is building and leading teams. Um, First, you need to identify openings. So where are you inefficient? What are your biggest pain points? And what type of person and skill set do you need to bring on? So one of your first questions when you were at that transition point of not having processes and realizing that you wanted to spend time with your wife, what was the one thing that you needed to do? What was the one person you needed? And it was a operator, an implementer, somebody who was going to be your chief of staff, who was going to run everything. So all you had to was content creator and brand personality. You didn't have to do any of the day-to-day stuff. So when you're clear in your sweet spot, then you can come back around and you're clear on your inefficiencies in terms of infrastructure. You can identify the type of person you need and then go to work on finding that person from a culture fit perspective and then bringing them on board. And if they're a long-term person, making sure that you're helping them get up to speed with what your vision, mission, and values are, and then allowing them to execute on your behalf, and then leading, managing, and holding them accountable. So everyone has a scorecard. We know what metrics we want to hit, and we manage capacity. We manage energy, so people can do the things that energize them versus the things that drain them, and put people in the right seats and let it grow. So it's it's so rewarding when you're at a place where you really do have processes and you're at a place where you can work through your team. It frees you up to grow the front end, which then in turn grows the entire business, which makes building a business a lot easier, to your point, because you have scale and you also have momentum, which momentum is probably one of the most powerful things when scaling a business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is, again, coming back from my perspective, when I thought about the idea of building and leading a team, it was completely overwhelming and intimidating. It wasn't something I looked forward to. It was something I wanted to do. I like doing the content. I like doing the research. I like doing the writing. I like doing the events. I like building the strategic relationships. That's my sweet spot. That's where I like to live. And so anything that took me into the weeds of the back office that I had to pay attention to just bogged me down. And so but when we brought the topic up, Stace, you lit up there. This is probably my favorite topic. I'm like, oh my God, I can't think of something that I would like least. But that was the answer. The answer is there's people out there like Stacy who want to do that. And there's a lot of people out there like me on the entrepreneurial side. They're like, no, I don't want to do that. And I had resisted. I tried it once. I didn't do a good job at it. I just backed up and said, forget it. I'll just, do my own thing and force more to the bottom line and, make my money in my investing. But then my wife got terminally ill, and I only had a few years with her. as it turned out. And I found myself locked in a room one day, in a hotel room with a book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. And I read that. And it was like the focusing question: what is one thing that I can do that'll make everything else I need to do either easier or unnecessary? And I was overwhelmed by what I was facing. I was overwhelmed by what I needed to do. And I had this brutal paradigm that I was having a hard time breaking, because I had swore I would never build a team again. I just would do everything myself. I'd use a few vendors here and there, maybe, but I didn't mind. I was that guy that just swore off that. Well, I had to come off that and say, okay, to better serve my wife, to better serve my family, to fulfill my obligations to my partner, to our audience, to everybody that counts on us, all of our sponsors and all of that, I've got to find a way to do more in less time. And the only way I'm going to do that is to design and build a team. And I thought, I'm not up to this. I can't do this. It'll take me forever and my wife will die while I'm doing it. So then I thought, okay, well, what is one thing that I could do that would make that happen? I got to find that one person. I got to find that one person who could build that team for me. And that's what I did. And that's where the phone call went out to Staci. And I said, Stace, would you come save me? And she did. And that turned out to be fabulous. I ended up being able to spend the last years of my wife's life with her quite a bit, and especially the last year. And it was hard on our entire family, but because we had a team, and a very supportive team, we were able to pull it off, and the business was able to continue on in spite of my reduced role. So now that that's over, which I don't mean to make it sound like it was a happy event. It wasn't a happy event. It was a sad event, but I've accepted that the reality is I no longer have that situation. She passed. So now I'm able to fully embrace the fact that I've got this team and I can go pursue bigger and better things. And I'm excited about doing that. But all of that came through tragedy. And I hope you never have to face tragedy to get to that place. But it forced me to realize that I didn't need to not have a team just because I didn't want to do it. I just needed to find somebody who did want to do it and create a relationship with them that made sense. And that's what I found with Staci. And then she built a business out of doing that now for other people in our syndication program, because they have the same problem. And so we just felt like we needed to do this series because there's so many people out there who are just stuck on that grindstone, and they get the concept, okay, I need to work on my business, not in it. But how do you really do that? And then, if you're like me, it's like I've always struggled to find good people. I always struggle to get people in the right seats in the right, on the bus, and then struggle to hold them accountable. I don't have to do any of those things today. I just have to tell Staci what I need. She tells me what she can do. We negotiate, and then she goes out and makes that happen. So
Yeah,
anyway.
I just want to say, for those who don't know our relationship, his wife is my mother. And so when she was diagnosed, he didn't want to run a team, but I also wanted to be there for my mom. So I spent the last 18 months of my mom's life with her. Well, many more, but like in her home, in the hospital with her, held her hand when her soul transitioned. I was there for every moment. So I'm coming at it from knowing how to build a team for a client, which Russ is a client, but I'm also know what it feels like to be the client, because I'm also the client of Organized to Scale. So I know what it feels like to have to let go, let the team make decisions and work through them so I could have time freedom as well. So there's a transition for both sides of it. When you're the visionary, when you're the person who wants the time freedom, and then also when you're the operator, there's a way to really scale on many levels.
Yeah, and the key is mastering these 10 core processes. So we've covered the 10 core processes, given you some highlights, and these are things that you can begin to focus on right away. But I would say first and foremost for me is that, when you commit yourself to designing and building a team, a lot of these processes will come out of the work that the team does. I don't design the processes. The team designs the processes. I just tell them what I want the outputs to be, and they figure it out, and that's better. And then we do the iterations, and I'm a part of that. We fine tune it, and over time, it just gets better. It gets better. It gets stronger. It gets stronger, and I become more free. And Staci really becomes more free too. She used to be very hands-on. Now the team handles most of the stuff that we did because she organized it so that she could let go and move on to other things. And yet at the same time, we continue to have everything operating within our business. So Staci, any closing thoughts on 10 core processes to scale your syndication business? A little bit of a long episode, but we had a lot to cover.
I just want to say that this isn't a set it and forget it type of thing. So we review these processes every 90 days when we do a 90-day review, because as your business scales, your processes scale too. So, and also as you get feedback, what's working and what's not working. So it's an iterative process. It's a living organism, like you say. And so definitely keep it on a growth path when you're implementing your processes.
Okay, so we'll call that a wrap. That was episode 6. We'll see you in episode 7.
One more thing. Sorry. If you want to have these 10 core processes, they're in the 4 tips for organizing your syndication business to scale. So if you send an email to scale@realestateguysradio.com, you can get a copy of them.
Scale@realestateguysradio.com. Thanks. I know you told me before we went on, I was supposed to remember that and I forgot. So there you go. That's why I have her. She remembers the things that I tend to forget. All right, folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Before you go, 3 things. Number 1, subscribe. When you subscribe, you build up our subscription base, and that helps us reach more people. But even more important, it helps us attract great guests and subject matter experts to share their ideas and information with you. Number 2, click that notification bell to make sure that when we do post a new video on this hot topic, you're notified right away. And number 3, share. Please share this information with friends. Help them get on board this bus. Help them protect and preserve their wealth to take advantage of what's going on in the world today. All right. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next video.